thing I am worried about, and I think we do need to debate at this conference, in my view, is how can you have an open debate about all of those things if there's too much of a climate of fear within our party and the way the party is being run? How do you get an open debate about the direction that we need to take to reconnect with the public if a party member is suspended for liking a tweet by another political party, or a member of parliament loses a whip for trying to protect disability benefits or the two-child cap? You know, how do you get to that point if that is the way we're doing things, where debate is being closed down?
In the carefully stage-managed atmosphere of a Labour Party conference, where speeches are choreographed for maximum impact and dissent is packaged as constructive debate, something revealing happened that conference organisers desperately tried to minimise. What began as the Andy Burnham show, with the Greater Manchester Mayor positioning himself as the popular alternative to an increasingly embattled Prime Minister, ended with less fanfare and more awkward questions about whether Labour's leadership crisis is being acknowledged openly or merely whispered about in fringe meetings and hotel bars. By day 4, the conference that was supposed to showcase Labour unity and purpose had become a referendum on whether Sir Keir Starmer has what it takes to survive the political storms ahead, and more importantly, who might replace him if he does not. Welcome to UK Decoded, where we expose the truth about how leadership speculation that begins as background chatter can become self-fulfilling prophecy when enough cabinet ministers start looking around the table and concluding their colleagues are bland compared to the great characters of the Blair government. Subscribe now for daily analysis that refuses to accept public displays of loyalty as evidence that knives are not being sharpened behind closed doors. Andy Burnham topped approval rate polling, and this fact alone explains why supporters see him as the obvious alternative to Starmer. In politics, where perception often matters more than substance, polling numbers provide the quantifiable evidence that ambitious politicians crave when positioning themselves for leadership bids. But critics warn that polling is the most fickle of measurements, that approval ratings can collapse as quickly as they rise, and that someone who has never faced the scrutiny of national leadership might not survive contact with the brutal realities of number 10. Burnham has carefully cultivated his image as the people's politician, the mayor who speaks for northern working-class communities that feel abandoned by metropolitan Labour elites. He has positioned himself on issues like transport and housing in ways that generate positive coverage without the baggage of having to implement deeply unpopular national policies. But being mayor of Greater Manchester is categorically different from being Prime Minister. The former allows you to champion popular causes and blame central government for failures. The latter requires you to make decisions that will anger large portions of the electorate regardless of what you choose. Sir Keir's conference performance apparently temporarily silenced many critics who questioned his ability to lead the country. Apparently. Temporarily. These qualifiers are doing enormous work in that sentence. A good conference speech can silence critics for days or perhaps weeks, but it does not resolve the fundamental questions about whether Starmer has a coherent vision, whether his government can deliver on its promises, whether he can maintain support as unpopular decisions accumulate. The phrase "far from being out of the woods yet" is political understatement that acknowledges Starmer faces serious threats without specifying how serious they might be. He has a tough budget to get through this autumn. Then in May, the Prime Minister faces what could be make-or-break local and devolved elections, when the rise of reform could be what seals his fate. Make or break. Not potentially challenging. Not difficult. Make or break, meaning that if Labour performs badly in May elections, Starmer's leadership could become untenable regardless of how many years remain in the parliamentary term. The cabinet minister who told The Independent that Keir needs to be less worried about Andy Burnham in this conference and what might happen to him in June or July next year is revealing more than they intend. This minister is simultaneously dismissing the Burnham threat whilst acknowledging that something might happen to Starmer in June or July next year. What exactly might happen? A leadership challenge? A resignation? A cabinet coup? The minister does not specify, but the time frame is telling. After the May elections, after the results demonstrate whether Labour can maintain support or whether Reform and other opposition parties are making significant gains. Pat McFadden's argument that the Prime Minister does not get nearly enough credit for the election victory last year, that election victories are hard and even harder for Labour, sounds like the kind of thing loyalists say when leadership is under pressure. Of course, Starmer deserves credit for winning, but he won against a Conservative Party that was exhausted, divided, and associated with years of perceived failure. He won with a massive parliamentary majority, but on a relatively modest vote share. And he won promising change and competence that voters are already questioning whether he can deliver. The question, if not Starmer, then who, is the crucial one that determines whether leadership speculation remains chatter or becomes serious threat. A leader can survive unpopularity, policy failures, and internal dissent if there is no obvious successor. But when multiple plausible alternatives emerge, when cabinet ministers start comparing current colleagues unfavorably to Blairites, when the party begins gaming out what a leadership transition might look like, that leader's position becomes precarious regardless of their parliamentary majority. The scathing assessment from a cabinet minister about their colleagues deserves to be quoted in full because it captures the brutal honesty of how some within government view their team. I look round the cabinet table and I think back to the great characters of the Blair government: Mo Mowlam, Robin Cook, David Blunkett, Jack Straw. Then I look round the cabinet table again and it all looks very bland. This is not an opposition politician attacking the government. This is a cabinet minister looking at their own colleagues and concluding they lack the character, the gravitas, the political skill of previous Labour governments. Mo Mowlam, Robin Cook, David Blunkett, Jack Straw. These were politicians with distinct personalities, clear ideological positions, reputations built over decades of political combat. They commanded respect even from opponents. They could articulate Labour values whilst making hard decisions. They were recognizable political figures who voters knew and had opinions about. The current cabinet, according to this minister's assessment, consists largely of bland functionaries who manage their briefs competently but inspire neither fear in opponents nor enthusiasm in supporters. But there are 4 members of this cabinet, and a former colleague, who are not bland and may have what it takes. This is where the leadership speculation becomes concrete. Not vague talk about needing fresh faces or new direction, but specific identification of potential successors who possess the qualities that Starmer allegedly lacks. The piece mentions that one person called for Angela Rayner to return to government quickly after she quit over her tax affairs. This reveals the calculation behind rehabilitating a figure popular with the left. Whoever facilitated Rayner's return was positioning themselves as someone who understands different wings of the party, who can unite rather than divide, who cares about what the left thinks even if most people do not think they really do. This is leadership positioning disguised as magnanimous concern for a colleague. Ed Miliband's transformation is perhaps the most remarkable story in this leadership speculation. The Energy Secretary wowed conference delegates at fringe events, laying out a more left-wing agenda and receiving enthusiastic applause wherever he went. Gone is the cowed and shrunken man who led the party to defeat in 2015. He has been replaced by a man who is a serious contender to lead the party again with new vigor. This rehabilitation parallels what happened to Ian Duncan Smith on the Conservative side, finding new purpose and credibility in policy areas after leadership failure made future leadership aspirations seem impossible. But Miliband's energy evangelism, his comfort with left-wing framing, his obvious enjoyment of political combat at fringe events, all suggest someone who has rediscovered his political voice and believes he has something to offer that Starmer does not. The question is whether Labour would consider electing someone who already led them to defeat once. The historical precedent is mixed. Churchill came back. So did Harold Wilson. But recent British politics has not favoured second chances for leaders who failed the first time. Miliband would have to convince the party that 2015 defeat was circumstantial, that he has learned and grown, and that his current policy agenda resonates in ways his previous leadership did not. Shabana Mahmood being catapulted into the spotlight as Home Secretary by replacing Yvette Cooper in arguably the government's most difficult job is significant. The Home Secretary role has destroyed numerous political careers because it combines enormous responsibility with limited good news. You deal with crime, terrorism, immigration, prisons, all areas where voters notice problems immediately but rarely credit successes. Cooper presumably left the role because it was damaging her politically or because she saw better opportunities elsewhere. Mahmood accepting it suggests either ambition that views surviving the Home Office as credential for higher office, or lack of alternative options. The fact that only 4 current cabinet members plus 1 former colleague are identified as not bland and possessing what it takes is damning assessment of the talent pool available. A cabinet has 21 members plus various attending ministers. If only 4 are seen as possessing leadership potential, that suggests the others are viewed as competent administrators at best, time servers at worst. The timing of when leadership speculation becomes serious is crucial. The cabinet minister who mentioned June or July next year was specific for a reason. That is after the May local and devolved elections. If those elections go badly, if reform makes significant gains, if Labour loses control of councils or devolved bodies, then Starmer's position becomes vulnerable regardless of his parliamentary majority. Backbench MPs who face losing their seats at the next election will start calculating whether changing leader improves their survival chances. This is how leadership crises accelerate. Initial speculation is dismissed as media gossip. Then poor electoral results make the speculation seem prescient. Then cabinet ministers who are publicly loyal start privately gaming out succession scenarios. Then backbenchers start organizing. Then someone has to publicly call for leadership change. Then the leader either survives by crushing the rebellion or falls because the momentum becomes unstoppable. Starmer is not there yet. He had a good conference apparently. He temporarily silenced critics apparently. But the language used to describe his position, far from out of the woods, tough budget ahead, make or break elections coming, suggests that people close to government understand he faces serious threats. And when cabinet ministers are anonymously criticizing their colleagues as bland whilst identifying 4 who are not bland and might have what it takes, the leadership speculation has moved beyond idle gossip to serious assessment of alternatives. Labour won a massive majority but on modest vote share against exhausted opposition. Reform is rising in polls and winning local by-elections with supermajorities. The budget will require unpopular decisions. May elections could demonstrate whether Labour support is solid or soft. And within cabinet, ministers are looking around the table, comparing their colleagues unfavourably to Blairites, and identifying 4 who might be able to do better than Starmer if circumstances require change.